Beitza Hashem, what we'd like to see is Beitza Daf Dalid, but let me try to give us an easy takeoff by going back to summarize some of the highlights of Beitza Daf Gimel Amid Beitz. And this sugya is about the halacha of bittul with regard to a davar shebeminyan, something that's sold by number, one at a time, two, three, whatever the number might be. And the question is, when it comes to the laws of bittul, we have a requirement that it should be something that could lose its identity, but something that has a chashivus to it, a very great significance, like a davar sheish bo tam, it gives taste to the mixture. Or you could talk about a birya, something that is a whole entity, alive. You know, what if it would be alive? It's a creature unto itself. Anything that has chashivas to it is afilu bi elef lo bata. So a davar shebeminyan, which is counted and sold by number, is an example of a davar shebeminyan shafilu bi elef lo bata. That's going to be relevant to a beitza if, let's say, this egg was laid on Yontif and it's also mishum nolad, and now it gets mixed up with other eggs. And the question is, can we apply the law of bittul? And the Gemara presents a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And that is, which you'll see about 7 lines up before the end of Daf Gimel Amid Beis, the Itmar Allah, and we have Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says es shedarko limonos, and Rabbi Shimon Lakish says kol shedarko limonos. When do we remove bittul? Now, this whole discussion and debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is within the confines, the context of Rabbi Meir Shita. We'll see other Shitas as we go along. According to Rabbi Yochanan, and this is going to be a great kula, Rabbi Meir is talking about es shedarko limonos. Es means that always when it's sold, it's counted. Reish Lakish holds kol shedarko limonos, which means that although generally speaking we count it, but it could be sold as units without even counting them. And Reish Lakish is machmir, and he says kol shedarko limonos. If in most occasions we count it, then it's already considered a davar shebeminyan, and it's not butter. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds kol shedarko limonos, which means that it's exclusively sold by numbers, by units, by counting them. Then and only then does it have chashivus. So now the Gemara is going to discuss a brisa, and the brisa quotes Rabbi Meir as saying es shedarko limonos, which is a clear-cut proof. 1 second. If we take the girsa, the text of the brisa as is, es shedarko limonos, then we have a clear-cut proof to Rabbi Yochanan, es shedarko limonos. It's got to be exclusively counted. Okay? However, if we take a different reading of the brisa, we come to the conclusion that it's kol shedarko limonos. And that would support Reish Lakish. So the Gemara asks, what's Rabbi Yochanan going to say according to that presentation? For example, when you talk about Beitzim, then Rabbi Yochanan's definition would not apply, because Beitzim are not exclusively sold by number. Sometimes they're sold in other ways, like by weight. And yet, the halacha is that Beitza is not batel. And the Gemara is going to talk about what's called a suffix treifa. You have a suffix whether this Beitza is a treifa or not. It got mixed up with other eggs that were kosher eggs, and we're not going to apply bittul, even though eggs is something that is kol shedarka limonos. That generally we count the eggs, but not always. And now the Gemara that we want to pick up today, in the name of Rav Papa, is going to try to present Rabbi Meir's Shita in a way that it could be reconciled with Rav Yochanan, who holds es shedarka limonos. And Hai Tana, the Tana that defies and disqualifies bittul in the case of a suffix treif of an egg, that Tana, again, although an egg is not es shedarka limonos, and it doesn't seem to fulfill the requirements of Rabbi Yochanan in defining a davar sheb'minyan, is Tana de litra ktsiosu. That Tana, with regard to the Beitza, should be identified with the Shita of another Tana in a famous case of litra ktsios. And litra, which is a certain volume of ktsios. Ktsios are the figs. What they used to do is they would dry the figs and then they would pulverize them and make them into what's called tvela, which we know from Elam Mitzias, if you find the Gulei Tvela, whether it's a Davar Sheish Bo Simon or not. In any event, the question now is, if you get a mixture of figs that are tevel, and you have not yet been mafresh trumas and maisras, mixed with figs that are already misukanim, you've already removed the trumas and maisras. And whether or not the figs that are tevel are batel in the mixture with the figs that were already subject to afrasha. And we have to add one more important introduction here, and that is that trumas and maisrus on figs is only derabbanan, meaning that on a deraisa level you're only chayiv in truma on one of the 5 species of grains and tirosh v'yitzar, which means the product of olives, that's oil, and the product of grapes, meaning wine or grape juice. Figs are other fruits. Again, they would be mechayev, let's say bikurim, but not trumas and maisrus. So this entire discussion about bittul only applies in the case of tevel derabbanan, where the chiv trumas and maisrus is derabbanan. The Omar, what happens with this litra of ktsios that got mixed up with other ktsios, which were not tevel? And he says, just one second, he tells you here that a litra, he says, is equal to a lug, which is the same as 6 eggs. A lug is shisha beitzin. Yeah, but usually we understand litra not by volume, but rather by weight. I mean, if you assume that litra is a weight, then you're not talking about 6 beitzin. Okay, so we don't have a clear answer to the exact size of a litra, but I don't think it's relevant for us today. So this Tana of litra de ktsios holds the Omar kol davar sheb'minyan afilu b'rabbanan lo batel. even we're dealing with a drabanan, there's no bittul, and this Tana is against Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan has no problem with that because that's a das yochid. So there is one dissenting view of the Tana of Litra the Ktzios, and he's of the opinion that kol shedarka limanos, as long as it can be counted, or shall we say it's popularly counted, that gives it the classification of a davar sheminyan, and it's not batel. And the Tana of Litra the Ktzios said this about figs with regard to true, which is only derabanan. The Gemara says kol shkein b'daraisa. If we're being machmir in something that is derabanan, and we're being machmir to say that it's a davar shebeminyan, even though it's a davar shebeminyan because it's darko limanos, reflecting the Shita Reish Lakish, how much more so in the Doraisa? Bisnan, and now we want to look at the Mishnah of Litra the Ktzios, which is a Mishnah in Masechet Trumos. Litra Ktzios, Shedrasa Alpi Igul. What they used to do is they had some sort of a round vessel, and they would pound the dried figs into this vessel. Some of the figs would go down into the bottom of the vessel. Some of the figs would get caught on the outer lip of the vessel. And the Mishnah says, "V'eini yodea b'eza igul drasa." Let's say he has a number of different vessels, and he knows that he took 1 litra of tevel, again tevel d'Rabbanan, and he pounded it on one of these various vessels. He doesn't remember which vessel. And we give other cases which are identical. Al pi chavis eini yodea b'eza chavis drasa, al pi kaveres eini yodea b'eza kaveres drasa. So we have these 3 cases. One is eagle, the other is chavis, and the third is kaveres, but they're all the same. Is Rabbi Meir quotes Rabbi Lezer, and here we turn to Daf Daled Amud Aleph. Roim es elyonos ki'ilu heim prudos, vatachtonos malos es elyonos, which means that if we could imagine that these dried figs in each one of these different kalim, different vessels, were separated from the pi hachavis, from the mouth of the vessel, is then what we could do is we can apply the principle of bittul by using the litros in the lower parts to nullify the litros in the upper parts, which means the litra that goes down to the bottom can now be integrated into a bittul situation to be mavatel that part of the litra that is stuck on the mouth of the kli. So that according to Rabbi Lazar, as quoted by Rabbi Meir, we look at the kli as a whole, including that which is inside the kli, that which is davuk, that is clinging to the outside of the kli, and we can establish bittul. Oh, Ira, you hear that taxi outside? That's Yuri. He just returned. No, I'm just kidding. No, he got on a plane last night.
Really?
I only know that because he davened with us here in the show.
Oh, very nice. Okay, very nice.
So I sent regards to you. Don't tell him that you know that he's coming back.
Okay.
I don't know about the laws of bidud or anything like that. Anyway, now we get to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, in Yesham Mea Pumin, Yalu, V'im Lav, Hapumin Asurin, Vashulayim Mutarim. Rabbi Yeshua says that I want to qualify this halacha and restrict it. When do we apply bittul and when we do not apply bittul? Here are the two cases. Case number one is yesh mea pumin. Now, what does that mean, yesh mea pumin? He has many vessels that have tevel in it, or I should say that have mesukon in it. And we have a din in Truma that Truma is batel b'mea. You need a ratio of 1 to 100. Im lav, if you cannot add together all these kalim to get the number 100, is then we have to separate those figs that were pounded on the outside of the kli from those that are on the inside of the kli. Those are the inside of the kli, we know, were misukanim. You took the trumas of maisrus, but the ones on the outside, we don't know. We assume that it's still teva. Now, before we go on, we have a different girsa in this shita of Rabbi Yeshua, and that's the girsa of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, his girsa is not Rabbi Meir's girsa, but rather Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im yeshad mea fumin yalu. If there are 100 other pumin mouths, then you could apply bittul, and you can be mavata the litra of truma, the imlav. But if you don't have mea pumin, then again we separate between the pumin on top and the shulayim on the bottom. Ha-pumin asurim, va-shulayim mutarim. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, afilu yesham shlosh meos pumin lo yalu. Doesn't matter how many mouths you have on the top of these kalim, there's no bittul. So now we have a case of a mixture that consists of 300 molds, and the ratio for nullification was 100. So we went way beyond that ratio from 100 to 300, and yet the litros on the mouths of the molds are separate. They're not butter, because you can recognize them and separate them from the litros in the shulayim. So we see here that even though we're dealing with a drabanan, in other words, we're talking about truma that's drabanan in the case of te'ena, we're still going to be machmir, and we're going to say that all the figs are asur, according to this Tana, because of that 1 litra of truma that cannot be bottled. And if that be the case, we now can explain why in the Beitza, if you have 1 egg and it gets mixed up in all the other eggs, it's not butter. Now, there's more to this Beitza, and now the Beitza is going to address a case where unanimously everybody agrees that there is a machlokas, meaning whether you take Rabbi Meir's version of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, or you accept Rabbi Yehuda's version of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar, is drasa be'igul. Now he presses the figs on the outside, the round part of this eagle, this mold. The Eini Yodeh Be'ez eagle drasa, but he doesn't know which one of these many different vessels he used. In that case, Divrei HaKol, everybody agrees, Ya'alu, that you can apply bittul by combining the top figs with the bottom figs, because you don't know which one of the kalim has the truma in it, and therefore they're all the kalim are bechlal l'safek. The Gemara says Divrei HaKol. What do you mean Divrei HaKol? But rather Hainu Pluktayu. How can you tell me that's Divrei HaKol? I mean, this is really the machlokas here between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua denies the possibility of applying bittul. Amar Papa Hachi Kama. The Bryce is telling us that Drasa be'igul, when he presses a litra of truma, of te'enim, into this round mold, be'eze yodea, be'ene yodea, be'eze makom igul drasa, where on which part of the mold, whether it was on the top or the bottom, he actually pressed in this tevel. Ilutzfona oladroma is divrei hakol yal, because in this case we don't know where it is. Once we don't know where it is, then it's all included in the suffix. So again, if you have a liter of truma, which is the rabbanon of figs, and you cannot recognize that unit, which usually you would sell on the market, once it's been pressed together with other figs, and it's inside this litra, this mold, this eagle, you don't know where it's located, then you're not going to consider it a davar shebeminyan, even according to Rabbi Yeshua, the way we saw Rabbi Yehuda interpreted Rabbi Yeshua, and therefore it's subject to bittul. And that would again support and defend the shita of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that eshed darkol limanos, that you only undermine bittul if it's only sold by number. Okay. Rav Ashi Omar Liolam Safek Yantiv Safek Chol. Now the Gemara is going back to the first Mishnah in Masechet Beitza, and we didn't know whether the Beitza was laid on Yantiv or on Erev Yantiv. Erev Yantiv is no problem, because then it's not muktzah, and there's no achana derabah. It wasn't that the egg was prepared on Yantiv itself, it was prepared on Erev Yantiv. If, on the other hand, it was laid on Yantiv, then we have a problem of muktzah, nolad, or perhaps a problem of achana derabah. Says Rav Ashi, heavy davar sheyesh lo matirin. The reason why this safek beitza, whether it's asur or mutter, when it gets mixed up in a tarovus is asur, is not because where we will hold. So we were talking about Rav Ashi, and we're now substituting a new principle for the hafkas habitul. It's no longer davar shebeminyan, now it's davar sheyesh lo matirin, which is very appropriate for muktzah. Muktzah is also on Shabbos, but it'll become mutter tomorrow. The kol davar sheyesh lo matirin, afilu b'derabbanan lo batel. So even though we have a suffix about this beitza, and we're dealing with the drabbanan of muktzah, of nolad, nevertheless, we cannot apply bittul when this egg gets mixed up with other eggs, and the reason for that is because it's a davar sheish lo matirin. Rashi says, ad shetochlenu be'isur, tochlenu beheter. Why rely on bittul when you could just simply wait until tomorrow and eat it beheter? But I believe that davar sheish lo matirin is much more than just, taking Rashi at a superficial level. Davar sheish lo matirin means that there's a matir that's going to be chal on this isur, and that puts the isur into a different category, and it's mafkia bittul. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Hope I didn't skip anything. Acherim omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Beitza te'achel hi ve'ima. Now, until now, we assume that according to Beis Hillel, there's a problem of muktzah, meaning that nolad is muktzah, and it's also on Yom. And we even had a sport to say it's more also more chomer on Yom Tov than on Shabbos. But then we have the Shita Beit Shammai. And again, although if you look in the Mishnah, back on the page for just a second, it says Beit Shammai Omrim Tei Ochel. And Beit Shammai on the Mekilim. Now, we have two issues. One is about the Beitza, and one is about the mother. The hen on Yontiv, if it's not muktzah, can be shechted, because shchita is considered ochel nefesh, and you can eat the chicken itself. The hen comes along the brisa of Acherim, and they're telling us in the name of Rabbi Lazar, that Beit Shammai's kula, their leniency applies not just to the Beitza, but to the mother, to the hen itself as well. You just see if he adds anything. No. He just points out that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about Beit Shammai because he was a Talmud of Beit Shammai. What's the case? If on Erev Yontif they had designated this hen for the purpose of shechting it, is pshita the ima sharia. Now the mother is mutter because it's not muktzah if you designated it for purposes of shechita. As far as the egg is concerned, we have a principle called uchla diafras, which we saw back on Daf Beis, which means that when you have a part, let's call it a limb of an animal, if the animal is not muktzah, that could only apply on Yontiv, not on Shabbos, but on Yontiv, then anything that's part of the physical body of the animal, or in this case the bird, is simply another part of the bird. You're like, the egg is not to be viewed as a separate entity. So if this be the case, Shita, what was the chiddush of this brisa? Ella, we have no choice but to assume the Tarnagolas Omedes Legal Beitzin. He never had in mind to shech the hen. Going into Yontif, if you would have asked him, in all honesty, what are you going to do with this hen? I need the hen to lay eggs. Is then we should come to the exact opposite conclusion. He, the ima asura. Why?
Right.
Because the hen itself is muktzah, and the egg is nolad mina muktzah. Now, Rashi points out here that we have a machlokas between Rab Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda regarding muktzah, and this Rabbi Eliezer, the Talmud of Beit Shammai, is of the opinion that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, we accept his view, and there is muktzah. And if there is muktzah, then there is nola. So how is it possible that Rabbi Lazar is quoted by a cherub in this brisa to allow you to eat the beitza and its mother? It's either pshita or it's completely wrong. Rabbi Zera te ochel agav ima. Very strange language. You know, we have the word agav in many sugyas and shas, but how does that concept of agav apply here to the beitza? And especially if we assume that the mother hen is omedes legadol beitzin. So what do you tell me agav ima? What do you mean agav ima? It should be awesome.
Right.
Echi dami, Amar Abaye kigon shalakacha stam. He didn't really decide exactly what he's going to do with this hen. Should he shecht it? Should he designate it to lay eggs? nishchata. If he didn't decide, then the facts on the ground will decide, meaning he can decide on Yontif to shech the mother, the hen, and huvara de lachilo minute. Since he had a machshava stam, his original purpose or intention was stam. It was undefined. It was amorphic. What's the word? Anyway, stam. So now he can decide on Yontif itself what he wants to do with this hen. It's almost like
Right.
lemafreya, like brera.
Yeah.
Lo nishchata. But if he didn't shech the hen, and now the egg was laid, hoover ra delegato beitzim omedes. Stam is always legato beitzim, unless he has a specific positive machshava for the sake of shchita, liachla. And we'll wait to see what happens on Yontif. If on Yontif he doesn't shech the hen, then it falls back into its natural category of legato beitzim. So what's the Beitza teaching us? Can I eat the mother and the egg? It all depends. If I go ahead and I shech the mother, then huvra dover de leachilaka, and therefore there's no muktzah. If on the other hand I don't shech the mother, then there was no clarification that it was l'shem achila. And in the absence of l'shem achila, we always assume it's legato beitzim. And if it's legato beitzim, then we have a serious muktzah problem, both with regard to the mother bird and the egg. Rav Mari Omar, guzma k'tanya. There's an exaggeration. The Sanya, we learned in the Beitza. Now, it sounds like Rav Mari is trying to answer the question pshita that the Gemara raised earlier. I have a note here. Do you have this note 17? He writes, although the Beitza refers to a hen that was designated for consumption. Now, if it was designated for consumption, we already established pshita. We don't need the Beitza to tell me that it's mutter. He calls it superfluous. Nevertheless, the Tana wished to reinforce the notion that the halacha follows Beit Shammai with regard to the egg. Therefore, he broadly states everything may be eaten, the mother hen and the egg. Again, the fact that the mother hen can be eaten, that's pshita. I don't need that. But since he wants to machadesh, that when we accept the shita Beit Shammai, and the egg itself is mutter, perhaps because we reject muktzah like Rav Shimon rejects muktzah, therefore he mentions the hen, but he's really interested only in the egg. Acherim omrim in this Beitza mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Beitza te ochel, hi ve'ima, befroach ukliposa. So we have a heter to eat the beitza and of course the hen, and now we have the efroach. If the egg hatches and a chick comes out, and kliposa. My kliposa. What is the word? We know the translation word klip is a shell, but what does it mean in this context? I mean, who's eating the shell of an egg?
Right.
Klipa bas achilahi? Now, I'd like to see what your stomach will look like if you eat the shell of an egg. Elefroach b'klipasa. So what does this mean, efroach b'klipasa? He says it's an unhatched chick. And you take it out of its shell. It didn't hatch on its own naturally. Ad kan lo pli Rabbanan aleid Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Ela heicha the yotza la'avir olam. Amal heicha lo yotza li'avir olam. Lo pligi. So in the case of an unhatched egg, everybody agrees it's asur. So again, it can't be klipa mamish because that's not edible. By process of elimination, the only fallback interpretation is that it's efrach b'klipaso. If it's efrach b'klipaso, then for sure it should be asur. And that's based on a premise that whatever different sides you have in the debate, in a case of Yatzal Yavro, where it was hatched naturally, but in a case where it didn't hatch naturally, then everybody agrees that the that the hen is asur. And he says here it's based on a sugya later on in the Vav, Rabbi Loz ben Yaakov and the Rabbanon have a machlokus about the status of a newborn chick hatched on a weekday that has not yet opened its eyes. Rabbi Loz ben Yaakov rules that it may not be eaten. In other words, it still has the status of mukt. So in any event, if we're talking about a case of efrach b'klipaso, then everybody would agree that that's us. That's called lo yotza li'avro. So now Rav Mori has to finally give us an insight into this brisa. Ela efrach uklipaso guzma. So the Gemara is giving us an example of the application of the guzma methodology. That when the brisa mentions the chick and the klipa, that's a guzma. And hachanami here too, in our brisa, te'ochel hi ve'ima guzma. So even though it's impossible to eat the shell, the Tana exaggerates and mentions it along with those edible items, namely the hen, the egg, and the hatched chick. Itmar. Shabbos for Yontif. So we have a Yontif on a Sunday. 1 second. Now we're getting into the sugya of Tnai.
Sorry, what?
I don't know if you remember this sugya. If you have two different kedushos, and Shabbos is one kedusha and Yontif is another kedusha, then you could introduce Tnai. But if it's kedusha achas, and you have 48 hours of straight kedusha, and the 2 days of Shabbos and Yontif form one indivisible unit, in such a case, Tnai is not going to be meaningful. So Rav Amar no the bazeh asur bazeh. If the egg was laid on the first day, namely on Shabbos, then it's asura on Yontif. Because Rav is going to hold it's all one kedusha. So basically, it was nolda bazeh. It's only one day. It's like Yom HaRichta. It's like one long day of 48 hours. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Nolda B'Zeh Muteres B'Zeh. So the Gemara now analyzes the machlokas between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Nema kasava Rav Kiddusha Achasi. That we integrate both Shabbos and Yom Tov into one long day. Now let me throw out one idea here. When Rabbi Yochanan says Nolda B'Zeh Muteres B'Zeh, he doesn't mean that it's mutter on Shabbos. He means it's mutter on Yom Tov. Why? Because you have shtei keddushos.
Right.
The kedusha of Shabbos is l'chud, and the kedusha of Yom Tov is l'chud. So you don't have a preparation for Yom Tov on a day that's sanctified with kedushas Yom Tov. But Rav, on the other hand, Nebo Kasava Rav Kedusha Achasi, and we integrate both Shabbos and Yom Tov into one long 48-hour period of Kedusha Yom. And therefore, Rav holds Nolda B'Zeh, Asura B'Zeh. So the Gemara asks for Amar Rav, Halacha, Ke'arbaz came in, Aliba de Rebbe Lazar. The Omar Shtei Kedushos. So Rav seems to paskin that we have two Kedushos. Now in Erevin, that's a Chumrah, because if it's two different Kedushos, and it's not 48 hours of continuous Kedusha, then I'm going to require that the Erev be Chal on the second day as well. And that's called Halacha Ka'arbaz Kenim. So you need a separate Erev Tavshilin on the second day, which is Yom Tov. You can't rely on the Erev Tavshilin of yesterday of Shabbos because they're two Kedushos. And in fact, Rav Paskins, like the Arbaz Kenim, who maintain that the 2 days, Shabbos and Yom Tov, are two separate Kedushos. Ella, so the Gemara now has completely rejected this interpretation of Rav. It cannot be that Rav holds Kedusha Achas, and if a Nolda B'Zeh Asura B'Zeh, because Rav in fact goes on record as holding Shtei Kedusha.
Right.
Ella Hocha B'Achana de Rabba Kamifli. Rav Islay Achana de Rabba, Rav Yochanan Leslay Achana de Rabba. So if you hold from Achana de Rabba, we have a principle called Ein Shabbos Meichin L'Yontif. The Ein Yontif Meichin L'Shabbos. So this egg that was hatched, that was laid on the second day, had its Achana on Shabbos the previous day. And since we are holding now by Achana de Rabba, Ein Shabbos Meichin L'Yontif. You don't have a Achana, and
right.
now the Beitza becomes Asura Midin Achana de Rabba. Rabbi Yochanan Lesley Achana de Rabba. He never accepted Achana de Rabba. And therefore, the fact that this egg was prepared on Shabbos for Yom Tov,
Right.
that doesn't bother Rabbi Yochanan. Kitanon. back to Rav and Rav Yochanan, they argue about something that the Tanoim already argued. Nolda b'Shabbos, te'ochel b'yontiv. B'yontiv, te'ochel b'Shabbos. So this is the view of the Tanakhama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Adayin Hi Machlokas. Shebeit Shammai Omrim Te'ochel, uBeis Hillel Omrim Lo Te'ochel. So I'm not sure what he means by Adayin Hi Machlokas. What was the extra word Adayin here? So anyway, it was born on Shabbos. You could eat it on Yontif. If it was born on Yontif, and tomorrow is Shabbos, so Yontif is on Friday, you could eat it on Shabbos. That's the view of the Tanakhama. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Adayin Hi Machlokas. What does that mean, Adayin? In other words, first he starts by quoting the Tanakhama. And you get the impression from the Tanakhama that Nova the Shabbos Te'ochel B'Yontif. Or B'Yontif Te'ochel B'Shabbos. Now we don't quote it so far a dissenting view, but Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Adayin Hi Machlokas. That really we have to go back to our Mishnah. Shebeit Shammai Omrim Te'ochel, Beis Hillel Omrim Lo Te'ochel. And this is going to be a case of Nolda b'Shabbos, and Yontiv is on a Sunday, immediately after Shabbos. He writes here that just as Beis Hillel Beit Shammai argue in our Mishnah over whether a Beitza Shenolda b'Shabbos is Asura on Yontiv, or Beitza Shenolda b'Yontiv should be Asura on Shabbos. When the Beitza is biblically prohibited, they do not argue whether such a rabbinic decree should be extended to the second of two consecutive holy days, which means that what? That they all agree. This is Rabbi Yehuda. They all agree that it's also. So then we have a Gzeira Otu Doraisa. Ushpezichne the Rav Ada Bar Ava Havale Hanach Beitzim Yontiv L'Shabbos. So these eggs were laid on Yontiv before Shabbos. Also Kame, and he came to ask the question before Rav Ada, Mai la'atvinu ha'idna v'nechle l'mocha. Can I roast them on Yontiv and eat them tomorrow? Before that should be posh, that it's awesome. He writes here, the host understood that such eggs may not be consumed on the day on which they were laid, pursuant to Beis Hillel's ruling in our Mishnah. He was therefore asking whether mukta, including handling the eggs as well. Seemingly roasting the eggs is prohibited for another reason. One may not cook for Shabbos what he may not eat on the day of Yontif. Amalei. So Rav Ada says, "My daitech, what are you thinking?" that you assume that tomorrow the eggs will be mutter. On Shabbos is Rav Yochanan Alocha Rav Yochanan. You're going to paskin like Rav Yochanan. Fine. Rav Yochanan was mekil in the case of Nolda b'Shabbos Muteris b'Yontif. He says Afilu Rav Yochanan Lo Kashari El Legoma Lemocha Aval b'Yoma Lo. So Rav Yochanan was matir eating the egg raw tomorrow. Obviously, you can't cook the egg at Shabbos. But biyome is low. And what does the word low mean here in this context? That it's real muktzah. In such a case, when the egg is laid on Yontif that falls on Friday, even Rabbi Yochanan would prohibit it from cooking, and even handling the egg on the day that it was laid. Hence, Rav Ada bar Abba denies his host permission to roast the eggs today in preparation for tomorrow. And the Gemara proves this sheet of Rav Ada. But Sanya, we have a brisa to support him. Achas Beitza shenolda b'Shabbos, the Achas Beitza shenolda b'Yontif, ein metaltel enosa. Lo lechasos bo asakli, v'lo lismoch bo karei amita. So we see that an egg that was laid on Shabbos is ein metaltel enosa. And the Gemara tells another story. Ushpezichne the Rav Papa. The Amileyahu Gava the Osalakami the Rav Papa. Havilahu Hanach Beitza Mishabbos Liyontiv. So the eggs were hatched on Shabbos, and now he wants to eat them on Yontiv. Osalakame Amarle, he was told. Ma'ul mechlinu lemachar. Wait a minute, what was the case here? The eggs were laid on Shabbos, and he wished to eat them on the following day, which was Yontif. Amalei zil ha'idna v'sa lemachar. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. The Ravlo mokia mora ile. The Yoma tava lechavre mishum shikrus. All right, we have to figure out what shikrus is all about. He also lemacha, when he came again tomorrow, the next day, Omalei iku hashta ishtalot. All right, this requires a lot more work. So this is a general introduction to a number of different sugyas. We touched on the sugya of davar shebeminyan eino batel, two shitas. We had the sheet of davar sheish matirin afilu belaf lo batel, and then we spoke a little bit about hachana deraba, about muktzah, of nolda bezeh, asura bezeh, and whether or not you could be matir. So that's where we'll stop for today. Okay, man?
Okay. All right, Shkoyach.
All right,
very good. Okay, you too.
Send my regards to you.
Okay. Yeah, I will.